Good morning. Welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, Reverend Leland Udell, and we're glad you tuned in the program. I'm finding that many people do watch this program even though you don't call us. This is a phone-in program from 12:15 until 12:30. So even if you don't call and don't write us, well, we are delighted to have you participating secretly, and I'm glad that we meet some of your needs and interest you with our topics. Today we have Maggie Grinnell here with us. She is a friend and she is a worker with people who have some physical disability up at a place called Club Respit in Saint Albans Bay area for adults with some problems who need support and help. We're talking with her not just about that context, but I guess her total life and also maybe your total life as our viewers. The subject is what is it about one's spiritual life that helps meet inner spiritual needs? What are the limits of what you can expect from a spiritual life? What are the parameters of it? What are you really looking for when you try to lead an active spiritual life? So we're talking about that. It's sort of a kind of concrete and specific, and there are many different ways to answer those questions. So at 12:15, I'll remind all of you to call us and get on the telephone and chat with us to make it a three-way conversation, because we have the technical capability of hearing your voice here, and the public viewers can hear your voice, and we'll all participate in your thoughtful comments. So Maggie, welcome. Glad you're here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. Our topic is one that interests me, particularly when you get down to the specifics, and you're not talking globally or sentimentally or in some kind of grandiose way. A lawyer friend of mine, he was a judge even, in his later years, he used to say, what I want to hear is how you explain what's going on in barnyard English. He said, no highfalutin words, no exalted concepts. Try to tell it to me straight out, concretely, so I really will know where you're coming from. And I always liked his approach. So that's what we want to do today, is to try to look at what do you look to your religious faith for, or your spiritual faith. You notice that I'm using both words. They're not completely synonymous. In some ways, when you say religious needs, there's a tendency for all of us to identify that with institutional answers to one's needs. What canonically the church is saying, the synagogue or the mosque, what the religion is saying, what the organization is saying and teaching. But when you say spiritual needs alone and you don't say religious needs, then there's more a tendency to focus on what you yourself have made your own from all of the teaching of your own religious organization. I've discovered, for example, Maggie, if you're a Buddhist, there are many kinds of Buddhism. Just as though if you were a Christian, there are many kinds of being Christian. And it's true for a Jew or Muslim as well. It's not simply just one approach. But we're looking at today what what do you find of value for yourself in your religious context? What spiritual direction does it lead you in and help you with on a personal level, on a concrete, practical level? That's what we want to look at today. So I'll stop talking and ask you to begin to educate us all.
As you were talking, I was thinking about it's sort of an evolutionary process, or it makes me do a life review. In other words, I started going back to my earliest memories of, you know, what my spirituality or spiritual development means to me, and I think one of the things for me is it's always in flux. I think that it's always changing. So I can't really say that there's some particular things that, or particular themes that have stayed constant. I mean, there might be a few, but I think that I'm always changing. And
well, I want to interrupt you. Is that good or bad?
To me, it's good. I think that's what's happening. For instance, in my life now, is my life is good, and I was sharing with some people today. In some ways, for me, that's challenging. I won't go into details, but I didn't have a very easy growing up. You know, there's a lot of things that happened in my life and a lot of early challenges. And over the years, things are better. And so now the challenge for me is to accept that things are getting better, and to sort of let them be that way.
Sometimes, speaking like the chaplain and priest that I am, when you discover things, you or anyone discover that things are getting better, what's helpful is to figure out why they're getting better. What is it that you're doing, or what is it, how your attitude or your experience or how is your life situation different, and how is all of those events, patterns, movements, themes come to make your life better. In other words, it just didn't happen. And so if you look at what's going on, then you can help the process even more.
I think that's true. And one of the things that I was looking at, partly for me, it's I belong to the Episcopal Church, and that's been a lifelong commitment that I've had, and it was also a choice that I made. When I was 6 years old, my mother died, and she had been an avid churchgoer, and all of us kids were pretty involved in going to church. And after she died, church became optional. And so I have 4 other siblings, and most of them decided that they wouldn't go to church anymore, or wouldn't be as involved. And for some reason, I kept on going. And so, as in a sense, I sort of made a choice at the age of 6 that church offered me something, and so I continued to go to church. And the older I got, the more involved I got in what went on. I mean, I joined the choir when I was 9 years old, and became an acolyte when I was a teenager, and I was confirmed. And it was interesting because during this time, it was in the late 60s, early 70s, and organized religion was really being questioned back then. And I think for me, because it had always been a choice, my needs were really met. And I think part of that was it really offered a solid foundation and a consistency that I otherwise didn't have in my own family, and out of that also came a lot of supportive people that were there. So
you had a surrogate family,
right?
And you had have values and standards that were constant.
And that was really important for me, and that time as well. I mean, I think there was sort of I don't know if it was like a re-involvement for people, especially like young people, to sort of embrace Jesus, you know. And there was I had a lot of friends that all of a sudden would just become instant Christians, you know, and that they wanted to save people, and then I had other friends that were sort of, you know, in similar religions or spiritual contexts. And I can remember being on a retreat with another denomination, and I remember this person was telling me that if I believed in God, that all these things that I wanted in my life would come true. You know, like I'd get the boyfriend, that I'd get my, you know, I'd start getting good grades.
The ocean-going yacht, the fancy car, the
well, just right, you know,
$100,000 a year job, all those things. If you go to church,
that's basically. But I was only a kid, but it was along the same lines as that, and I think that a lot of my friends bought that for a while, but then when things didn't start happening the way that they wanted to, or God, you know, brought in some bad stuff, then they were like, well, gee, I don't know if I believe in this anymore.
It didn't work for Jesus. You know, when he was a baby, his parents had to go off to Egypt. If they were fleeing for their lives, it didn't work for him. And he actually got crucified, died.
They didn't. True.
Didn't work for him. He was betrayed by Peter and Judas, two of his buddies. I don't know. I know, and I think for me, because I had made the choice as a child, and it was in a sense my choice, and just had received a lot of positive spiritual experiences up to that time, I didn't quite buy it, and so in a sense I wasn't as let down as some of them were. What is the truth in what they're saying? I think there is some truth, but not quite the way they paint the picture. Can you find some truth in what they're saying about how your faith can have a practical value for you?
I don't.
Have I stumped you?
I don't know. I'm trying. I guess I'm sort of like, you know, in that being as a 16-year-old, and how did I feel about all that was going on, and you know, and I think about what's going on now. Because you know, I think too, there's also that life just happens, and you know, as you're saying, with Jesus, I mean, he didn't bargain for all the things that he had to go through.
No.
But I think maybe what it is just, and one of the things that I've come to develop in the last couple of years, or fine tune, is that God really wants the very best for me, and that, you know, as I say, life just happens, and that when bad things do happen, there's always a lesson. I mean, God is always there. I mean, there's a saying in the spiritual fellowship that I belong to, that God doesn't bring you along, you know, or help you along just to dump you on your head, and
that would be pretty cruel, God.
True.
No good friend would do that.
Right. And I think that's, I mean, in a sense, I'm really lucky, because at the time that I was growing up, and as I was saying, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a real push to have God be a more benevolent God, instead of this hellfire and brimstone. You know, you have to toe the line and do all these things that you should do, because if you don't, you know, God's just going to come down and strike you. And when I was growing up in this particular church, you know, was that God was a compassionate God, and Jesus was a compassionate person, and you know, he understood what it was like to be a human being, and I think that's the whole thing, is Jesus was a human being. I mean, yeah, he's maybe what you call perfect, but he was a human being, and I always take heart in that at times when I don't do things the way that I perceive that I should do them, or the way that I perceive that maybe God wants me to do them. I mean, part of life is making mistakes, and that's one of the things I think I received from my spiritual development is it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, that's basically how we learn.
Trial and error.
Right.
You know, you watch a child learning how to. Well, I remember when my granddaughter was learning how to crawl, she could only crawl backwards. She couldn't crawl forwards. And after a while, after some weeks of crawling backwards, she finally discovered it was sometimes difficult to see where you were going when you crawl backwards, trial and error, and she'd bump into things she didn't want to bump into. So she tried, maybe I'll try going forward. And hey, that was better. The same kind of principle, I think, trial and error. The important thing is to keep looking, keep experimenting, keep asking questions, keep running the risk of learning.
I think I like the way you put that, running the risk of learning. Yeah. And that, you know, I don't want to say, well, mistakes are a part of life, or doing things wrong, or, you know, in my case, I think what I've developed over the last couple of years is an acceptance for how I am, and I'm one of these people that you can tell me the stove is hot, and I'm going to touch that stove anyway, and that's just part of my learning process. It's not like I don't trust a person, but for me, you know, I've had plenty of people in my life say, no, you shouldn't do this, and I can sit there and I can say on an intellectual level, say they're right, but for some reason I'm the one that has to go out and do whatever it is. And I'm not talking about anything like really horrendously bad, but maybe just being in a certain relationship that I shouldn't be in, or maybe moving somewhere that it's not a good time for me to move. But it's just something that I have to do, and maybe there'll be times when I fall on my face. But what happens is that I usually learn a lesson, and not only that, what I'm finding now, and what benefits I'm reaping in a sense for, you know, the troubled times that I've had in the past, is that I'm there for other people, and that's been the neatest thing for me, is that I don't just listen to a person. It's like I basically know where that person is coming from, because I felt where they are, you know, in my own life, and that's real important to me. And so I feel like I can really just say, yeah, I've been there.
You have walked in their moccasins.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oops, excuse me. Jesus has a saying that I quote to a lot of people that is often somewhat neglected, at least in Episcopal church circles, and that is, Jesus says you need to be as wise as the serpent,
oh, yes,
and as innocent as the dove. Both. In other words. And a lot of people emphasize being as innocent as the dove, but they forget about being as wise as the serpent. So they end up letting themselves be hurt, being violated, being taken advantage of. They don't really think about the repercussions of what they're doing or not doing. You need both, and to be wise and aware of the world and of yourself and of what you're doing and how it's being received.
I was just thinking, it's like, well, how does a person become wise? And I'm wondering if becoming wise is just having been through some of the things that you're just talking about, you know, in terms of, I mean, there's been certain situations where I have been a victim, and where, you know, there's been people around, and I have to admit that have maybe told me that it wasn't such a good idea that I'm in that situation, and I've done it. I've done it anyway, and yeah, there's part of me that wishes I could have listened to him, but I didn't, and you know, luckily I've sort of come up walking again. You know, I've come out okay, and in a sense, I think I think wisdom is one of those things that is acquired as the older we get, you know, or the more we live. I mean, maybe there's some people that are born with a grace of wisdom, or
I don't
sort
think
of.
so.
You don't think so?
No, I think we all have to learn. We all have to learn. We heat our home, as you know, by wood stoves generally, and when we've had when my granddaughter was still very small, and she started crawling around, we had to teach her hot,
Mm-hmm.
don't touch, stay away, hot. She never touched it, but she got the message. And our own children, when they were small, we had wood stoves, and they didn't get burned. But I made a wooden frame for the metal heat shield underneath the stove. So if you're a child or your dog or a cat, if you walk over there or get close to it, you bump into the frame, like a picture frame around it, and so you can't absentmindedly get next to the stove without hitting that barrier. And I did that on purpose, trying to be as wise as the serpent.
Right.
For myself as well, not just for children. We need to protect ourselves sometimes from foolish and dangerous things.
It was interesting because as you were saying that, I was thinking about God, and that's sort of what God is. God is like the shield, and it keeps us from maybe, you know, it's like having the commandments or whatever, and those are things that really keep us from going out and hurting other people or hurting ourselves. But
the Ten Commandments, you're thinking of?
well, just even you know, life's values, or what we're taught in our religious upbringing or moral upbringing or whatever. I mean, we have all these ways or codes that teach us how to live our life, and you know, I think most of us really strive to live our lives in that way. But you know, and if we don't follow them, then usually we get hurt, and And I think, you know, that's part of what's happened, like over the last maybe 20 or 30 years, is there was a sort of protective shield, you know, of you have to behave this way, and if you behave this way, things will be okay. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you know, the early 60s happens, and values were questioned, and everything was questioned. So all of a sudden, it's like, well, you know, what is there? What's that barrier now? You know, I mean, just it seemed like everything changed, and all of a sudden, you know, when the challenge is, we all have to come up with our own idea of what's right. You know, we can't just, you know, it's like the whole thing, like for me, it was question authority. I mean, that was sort of the premise of when I was growing up, was to question authority. You didn't have that comfortableness of just having it be a certain way, and that was the way it was. Everything was being questioned. And then out of that, trying to come up with one's own set of values and spiritual framework.
So it sounds like you've been working hard.
Yeah.
Well, there's another saying that work out your salvation with fear and trembling.
Right.
And there's some real truth to that. It's not easy. It's not that you save yourself. It's not that you make yourself acceptable to God. But it means, at least for me, the saying, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, is to ask questions, explore, trust, love, risk, evaluate, weigh what you've heard, what people tell you, what churches or mosques or Jewish rabbis tell you, with your own experience. Does it make sense? Is it real for me? Where do I need to adapt it? That's working, to me, that's working out my salvation. Not just taking things completely by faith without any examination.
Right.
I think that can be dangerous, to just take things completely by well, you not use the word faith, taking it, things because somebody tells you to, and that they may be a powerful person, an influential person, or somewhat hypnotic. I mean, I respect and admire Billy Graham a lot, and I heard him once up close in my seminary chapel preaching to us. But he was so powerful and charismatic as a speaker that he could have me believing in Baby Ruth bars before I knew it. He could just sort of, you don't fall asleep when you're listening to Billy Graham.
Right.
You really listen, and he really gets your full attention. But you really have to think about what he's saying and how it fits with your own personal spiritual life. Not that he's necessarily wrong, but that his style is not necessarily my style.
Right.
So, what's unique for you about your own spiritual life? What does it do for you that you don't find being done anywhere else?
I think basically what it's given me is just a belief that things are really okay. And I mean, my basic, I mean, I'm Episcopalian, and I like the term cradle Episcopalian, in the sense that I've always been involved in the church, and that's given me the stability, I think, that I've needed and still do need. But at the same time, it offers me the flexibility to also embrace other aspects of different religions. I just recently saw Thich Nhat Hanh, and I think that he's a wonderful man, and I have there's some Buddhist members in my family as well, and there's really some practices that I really get a lot of fulfillment out of, and one of them is and just teaching is like staying in the moment, and that's so much of what the Buddhist tradition to me is about, is learning to stay present in the moment. And I think that's also, I think Jesus talks about that too, but for me, just hearing it from other people as well, you know, and also the Native American tradition I derive a lot out of too, and I love it when they describe God as being the great mystery. There's just something about, because I think God is a great mystery, and for me, I derive a lot of, I love nature, and I think that comes from the Native American tradition, you know, and the honoring of nature, because I need that too, and I feel that, you know, and those two in particular are sort of complementary with my Christian faith. I know that I am a Christian, but as well as I also know that I can derive even, you know, like, and Judaism, and you know, there's some family members of mine that believe in an East Indian religion, and so because I have a main core, I'm able to embrace other parts of different religions, and I need what they have to offer as well.
I have a way of, I like what you said. I would like to elaborate on it a little. I'm not a dancer. I wish I were, but I'm not. But I enjoy dance, and I sometimes use that as an analogy. If you want to dance, there's a certain choreography you need to be able to express. And are you going to try to dance like Baryshnikov danced with big leaps in classical ballet, or are you going to come across as modern dance, or are you going to come across in some pop dance method? When I was a kid, jitterbug, you know, was the way you would dance, or the old-fashioned foxtrot. What is your choreography? And you just don't. You can, or even rhythm. I used to teach in a private school in Greenwich Village, and we had classes. They call them for, I think, eurythmics for 3 or 4 year olds, and they just learn to move with the music. But generally speaking, as you get older, what kind of movements do you make? And so you need some framework, and then out of that framework, you can have subtleties and variation, which I think I heard you saying. But it's essential to have a core. And a lot of people these days say, well, I don't want to belong to any spiritual group, Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, Episcopalian, Roman Catholic, Jewish. They all have their own corruptions and their own faults and their own weaknesses. And I'm just going to love God and live my life. But when you say it that way, if you follow through, it means you don't have any choreography to follow. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So your own personal variations never get into action because you don't know what kind of steps to take. So I find for myself anyway, and I think I hear you saying the same, you need to have some kind of faith commitment, spiritual context that you follow, and then out of that you find your own personal variation.
I think that's definitely true, and I think it's whatever a person's spiritual context is. I mean, I think you're right, there has to be that core first. And because I belong to a spiritual fellowship, and there's a lot of people that maybe have been totally turned off by any kind of organized religion, and you know, they would not consider themselves atheists by any means. I mean, they believe there's something out there, but they just don't know what. And one of the things that the spiritual fellowship has tried to do is say, even believe in all of us, in the sense that we're all striving to find the same thing, you know, and that from there, as time goes on, you know, they just sort of learn to trust other people more, and just sort of, because I think too it's an opening up process. And the more one can open up, the more, you know, one can let in certain things, you know, and then as time goes on, I mean, it's just like an evolutionary process. Faith just it just continues to grow, and to me it grows as long as I have the willingness to let it grow. And I think in a sense that's where that choice comes in again, is because, you know, I know that my life is far better now in having a spiritual practice than it ever could be if I didn't have that spiritual practice. And I really have a lot of gratitude, because I right now am really relying on my spiritual practice and how I feel just to go about my daily life, and it feels real good. But at the same time, I'm not going to tell anybody that this is what they have to do, because I think that is a totally individual thing. It's not something that, you know, you can just tell somebody, gee, I think you'd feel a lot better if you got a little religion in your life. And maybe there's times when I might want to do that, but I think we all have our I mean, I think a spiritual journey is very individual, and we all have to have our own spiritual journeys.
Yeah, I think that's true, because we're all unique.
Definitely.
Even if we call ourselves Reformed Jew or Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, or Zen Buddhist, it becomes our own if we really get into it and take it seriously. If we don't take it seriously, well, then we're just dabbling. We're just playing with it. We're not really giving it our whole being, and then we never really experience much of anything.
Right. No, I think that's true.
No.
I mean, I was just thinking of, and my own family in particular. I mean, after, you know, our mother died, and we were sort of left to our own spiritual devices, so to speak, as far as what the paths we were going to follow. There's, you know, as I say, I have 4 other siblings, and 2 of them are believers in this East Indian religion, you know, and they believe that each age has a perfect master, and yes, Jesus is very important, but he was just one of the perfect masters along the lines of others, and that they have a spirit, you know, and it's something like, for instance, a being will get this light, or somehow will be, it's almost like the Pope, but it's not like the Pope, but somebody has just somehow chosen to embody all the characteristics in human form, and
Bodhisattva.
In a sense, yeah, and so he's a person that everybody looks to for their spiritual guidance, and you know, part of that is being a vegetarian and meditating, and there's just a whole lot of things that revolve around that. And when I was like 14, I came out to Vermont for the first time, and my sister, as I said, has been in this for quite a number of years. And it really made me think about, well, am I going to keep my Christian beliefs, or am I going to somehow turn to the beliefs that they have? And I stayed with my Christian beliefs, you know. But my younger sister didn't. She became a vegetarian and became involved in the religion, and it's very good. I mean, it has some very good points to it, and it has a lot of guideposts in it, and I know that she's derived a lot of spiritual fulfillment for it, just as my older sister. And then I have a brother who decided to become Roman Catholic, and he is still to this day a Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. And then I have another brother who is sort of still exploring his own spiritual leanings, but you know, it's just the idea in my family alone, there's all kinds of different spiritual experiences, and maybe that's what's helped me honor a lot of other people's spiritual experiences, is because it's just so diverse in my own family, but we've all had the chance to get there on our own path. It's been our own path.
I think that's why we need to have respect for each person's path, because it's by definition it's going to be different than our own. But that doesn't mean that it's silly or wrong or going to get them in trouble with God.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, I think to me it's just whatever it is, just learning to be the best that we can be. You know, and treating others the best way, and living a way that's the best for us to live, you know, as far as like regarding everybody and having respect for living things that are around us, and just, you know, the golden rule, I guess, you know, is really what it's about. And I think that's what a lot of religions, I mean, just and just to love God, whatever that God is, the best way that we know how.
Well, I think it's, at least for me, it's more than a rule, because in a rule there's no relationship.
Right.
It's just following some code, law code. There's no life, blood. There's no being surprised by the movement of the Spirit. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I think that's true. I mean, I just sort of threw out the golden rule just because I guess that's part of that was one of the things that my grandmother always, in her way, you know, try to live the golden rule, you know. But
the Ten Commandments.
Right, the Ten Commandments, and
well, they're a good guidepost, which Jews and Muslims and Christians all agree on, which is kind of nice.
True. I guess I don't really quite have the words for what I'm trying to say, so I just sort of threw out the...
Well, rule isn't bad. I think we all need something concrete to keep us from deluding ourselves sometimes, so we don't rationalize our actions, and sometimes the Ten Commandments can help us realize that we are going in directions we don't really want to go.
Mm-hmm. Offers a framework.
Yeah, an objective standard.
Right.
A rabbi friend of mine calls them the Big Ten.
Oh.
So, are we ready for opening the mic to our viewers? Well, 5 minutes more. So we give you warning, and 5 minutes we'll ask you to call in. I have the sense that you've worked out your own understanding yourself, Maggie, that this isn't something you have in a book that you got, or some notes when you took confirmation class years ago as a Episcopalian, or that someone's sermon encapsulates everything. This is your own expression of spiritual faith. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot out of, people's sermons, and I try to stay awake doing them, you know, but it's just a compilation of things. I mean, I think, you know, in a sense, maybe what I'm finally finding is all, you know, maybe it's because I'm like middle-aged. I mean, I'm 45, so, and so I'm sort of like, I'm middle-aged, you know, and that's sort of been a hard thing to accept in a way, but at the same time, you know, I have a good chunk of life to look back at, and I think, you know, like I say, I'm reaping the benefits from some difficult experiences that I've had, and I've had a lot of good teachers along the way, and, you know, and I think one of the things is, you know, God is like that still small voice, and that Buddhist saying, like, everybody's my teacher, and I really believe that. I mean, I think that I, you know, as long as I'm willing